The sun was sinking low over the outskirts of the city, spilling long, fractured shadows across forgotten alleys and empty lots. It was one of those places people pretended didn't exist, the kind of place you drove past with your windows up, telling yourself you didn't see what you saw, a stretch of broken glass and rusted cans, a wasteland of silence and memory. The wind whispered through the bones of old street signs and the air smelled faintly of gasoline and sorrow. Officer Ethan Cole had driven these back roads for years, routes no one wanted anymore, territories abandoned by both hope and law. He knew every pothole, every flickering streetlight, every burned-out corner where the city's forgotten came to disappear. But that evening something felt different. Something quiet, unseen, uneasy, like the city itself was holding its breath. His radio buzzed with static, a low hum breaking through the rhythm of his thoughts. And then he heard it. A sound so faint it could have been the wind. A whimper, thin and trembling, somewhere between the rustle of garbage and the hum of the cooling air. He turned off the engine. Silence swallowed everything. For a moment he thought he'd imagined it. But then it came again, soft, broken, human. Ethan stepped out of the car, his boots crunching on glass and gravel. The evening light had turned orange and bruised, and the smell of rot drifted from behind an old warehouse, the kind of place that had once housed something alive. A factory, maybe, or a dream that didn't make it. He moved slowly, hand on his flashlight, its beam slicing through dust and shadow. At first, he saw nothing, only heaps of trash, old rags, a tangle of twisted metal. But then, in the corner of his eye, a flicker of movement. Something small, fragile, out of place. He turned, heart suddenly hammering in his chest. Near a pile of garbage half hidden beneath a torn blanket, something shifted. He called out softly, "Hello? Is someone there?" No answer, just the faint sound of breathing. Or was it the wind again? He stepped closer, every instinct sharp now. And then he saw her, lying still on the dirt. A little girl, her skin pale as paper, her limbs thin as sticks, her hair tangled gray with dust and her tiny fingers curled like wilted petals. For a split second, Ethan froze, his brain refusing to believe what his eyes saw. He thought she was gone. The world seemed to stop. The city sounds faded and all he could hear was the blood pounding in his ears. Then he saw it, the faintest rise and fall of her chest. She was breathing, barely. Ethan fell to his knees beside her, his breath catching in his throat. Hey there," he whispered, his voice breaking as he reached out a trembling hand. "It's okay. You're safe now. You're safe." But she didn't move. Her cracked lips parted slightly and a dry, rasping sound escaped her throat. A word, maybe. Or just the effort to exist. Her dress, a faded pink once bright with innocence, hung loose from her small frame, torn and stained from the dust and days of neglect. He took off his jacket and wrapped it around her, feeling how frighteningly light she was, like holding a breath that could vanish any second. Her fingers twitched again, as if reaching for something she'd lost long ago. A hand, a home, a voice that once said her name. Ethan swallowed hard. He didn't know her name, but he whispered one anyway, softly as if the sound could carry warmth into her soul. "Stay with me, sweetheart. Please." He pressed the radio. "Dispatch, this is Unit 47. I need immediate medical assistance. Possible child. I'm unconscious but breathing. I'm at the Old Mill Street warehouse. Hurry." The static answered first, then a crackle. "Copy that, 47. Help on the way." But minutes stretched into forever. Ethan stayed kneeling there, his knees sinking into the dirt, the girl's faint heartbeat echoing against his trembling hand. The city around them was still, only the distant hum of cars, the slow fade of daylight, and one man's desperate whisper fighting against the weight of a world that had stopped caring. He looked around, a forgotten corner of humanity. Yet here, in all this ruin, was something fragile and beautiful still fighting to live. If you believe kindness and second chances can change a life, take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Kind Heart Stories. Because sometimes, all it takes is one person who stops the car, one moment of compassion in a place the world forgot, and one small breath to bring a miracle back to life. Her eyes fluttered open for a split second, revealing a ghostly shade of blue glazed with exhaustion and pain. It was barely a moment, a flicker of life through the veil of darkness. But for Ethan, it was everything. That single breath, that fragile sign, was all he needed to know she was still fighting. He grabbed his radio, hands trembling, his voice breaking with urgency as he shouted, "Dispatch, this is Unit 47. I need that ambulance now. She's alive, repeat, she's alive." The words echoed through the static, and for a heartbeat, the entire world seemed to wait. He knelt beside her, his shadow stretching across the dirt and broken glass, and that's when he saw it. Just a few inches from her hand, a small stuffed bear, torn open along one seam, its fur matted with soot and grime. One side of its face was burned, its button eye melted into a dark, empty socket, yet the other half still smiled, innocent, soft, untouched by the ruin surrounding it. A name tag stitched on the ear caught the fading light. "For Ivy, love, Mom." The words hit him harder than a bullet. He stared at them, feeling his throat tighten as he brushed off the dirt. His mind began to race. Who was Ivy? Where was her mother? And what kind of nightmare had ripped them apart? He turned the bear over gently as though afraid it might crumble. Something slipped from beneath it. A small faded photograph, edges curled, the colors almost gone. He lifted it carefully between his fingers. A woman and a little girl, both smiling, sunlight pouring over them like blessing. The woman's hair was long and bright, and the little girl, Ivy, wore that same pink dress, only clean and whole, her hair tied back with ribbons, her eyes alive with laughter. Behind them stood a neat little house, a white fence, flowers spilling from the porch railings, a picture of peace, of safety, of a life that now felt galaxies away. It was clear this child hadn't always lived in darkness. Something had happened, something cruel. Ethan's heart pounded as he looked around the lot again, seeing not just trash and ruin, but the remnants of a story, a family erased. Near the wall, a cracked plastic bowl half filled with murky rainwater, a dirty blanket stiff with cold, footprints, adult ones, leading away from the scene, fresh enough that the dirt still held their shape. Someone else had been here, maybe still was. He stood, scanning the shadows, hand instinctively brushing the holster at his hip. The warehouse loomed silent behind him, its windows boarded, its doors chained but not locked. He listened, only the wind, only the faint hum of a city that had forgotten this place. And then the sirens came, far away at first, just a whisper of hope in the distance, then louder, growing, rising through the weight of the night. Ethan turned toward the sound, his heart finally daring to breathe. When the ambulance arrived, the medics moved fast, efficient, practiced, but even they hesitated for a moment when they saw the girl. So small, so fragile, so close to gone. They checked her pulse, her breathing, their voices clipped and urgent. "BP's low, get the oxygen ready. We need to move." Ethan stayed beside her, holding her tiny hand as they lifted her onto the stretcher. Her fingers barely wrapped around his. He leaned close, whispering, "You're safe now, sweetheart. You're safe." But even as the ambulance doors slammed shut and the sirens wailed into the distance, his heart refused to calm. The name still echoed in his mind. Ivy. It looped in his thoughts. Soft as a prayer, heavy as a promise. How could anyone abandon a child like that? What kind of world allowed it to happen? In silence, in shadow, without a single soul noticing. That night, Ethan didn't go home. He couldn't. He followed the ambulance to the hospital, parked his cruiser under the humming glow of the floodlights, and walked straight to the pediatric ICU. The sterile hallways were washed in white light, the scent of antiseptic sharp in the air. Monitors beeped, voices whispered. And behind every door a story was unfolding, some ending, some beginning. Ethan sat down outside the emergency doors, staring at the red light above them, watching it flicker with every motion inside. Hours passed, minutes stretched into an eternity of waiting. He didn't move, didn't speak, didn't even realize how cold his hands had gotten. When the nurse finally stepped out, her expression was weary but kind. "She's stable," she said softly. "Severely malnourished, dehydrated, but she's strong. It's a miracle she survived this long. We think she's been living off rainwater and scraps." Ethan nodded slowly, the words hitting harder than any wound he'd ever taken. He didn't sleep that night. He couldn't bring himself to leave her. He sat beside her bed, the dim glow of the monitors painting soft blue light across her face. Her chest rose and fell in fragile rhythm. The oxygen tube hissed quietly. The stuffed bear, now cleaned and stitched by the nurse, rested at her side. Ethan stared at it, then at the little girl who had become his reason to stay. His mind raced through every case file, every missing child report he'd ever handled. He opened his old tablet, scanning through years of forgotten paperwork, faces, names, dates blurred by time and bureaucracy, and then he stopped. A name, Ivy Mae Harlow, missing, age 6, last seen almost 2 years ago, a small photograph attached, the same smile, the same blue eyes. The same bear. Ethan felt his stomach twist. He looked up at the girl sleeping beside him, fragile but breathing, alive. Tears burned behind his eyes. He whispered to himself, barely audible in the hum of the machines, "I found you." Outside, dawn was breaking. The first light crept through the blinds, turning the sterile white of the hospital room into gold. For the first time in years, Ethan felt something stir inside him, something he thought the job had long since taken away. Hope. And somewhere deep down, he made a silent promise that this little girl would never be forgotten again, because sometimes one heartbeat is enough to change everything. One child is enough to remind the world that compassion still matters. And one man's choice to stop and look can rewrite a life that everyone else left behind. Missing after her mother was last seen fleeing an abusive home. The mother's name was Claire Malone. That name alone made Ethan's chest tighten. He scrolled through the old case file again, the faded photo attached, the official tone of the report, the words typed coldly by someone who had never met them. Presumed deceased. Case closed due to fire damage and lack of leads. But something inside him screamed otherwise. He had seen Ivy. He had felt her heartbeat under his fingers. And he knew, somewhere out there, a mother might still be searching. Or worse, she might not even know her daughter was alive. Days turned into weeks. Hospital mornings blurred into late-night stakeouts and endless paperwork. Every day, Ethan visited Ivy. He brought her tiny things, a small blanket in pale blue, a picture book with soft pages, a new stuffed bear with a pink ribbon stitched on its paw. At first, she didn't react. She just stared past him with those distant ocean gray eyes, as if her soul hadn't caught up to her body yet. But slowly, painfully slowly, something began to shift. Her cheeks started to fill out. Her color returned, faint and fragile like dawn light. Her fingers grew steady enough to hold the crayon he'd brought her, though she never quite managed to smile. Ethan tried not to push. He spoke softly, told her stories about the stars, about his dog when he was a kid, about the way the city lights looked from the hills at night. Sometimes she'd listen. Sometimes she'd just close her eyes, her hand still clutching the new bear as if it were the last thing she trusted. And sometimes, when she drifted half asleep, her lips moved, barely forming words. "Mommy, don't hit." Each time, Ethan felt something inside him crack open. He'd heard every kind of cry in his career, the desperate, the broken, the angry, but nothing hurt more than the whisper of a child remembering pain. He'd step out into the hallway after, his jaw clenched, staring through the hospital window as if the city itself owed her an apology. He promised himself, quietly, fiercely, that he wouldn't stop until he found the truth. No matter how deep he had to dig, weeks passed, rain fell. The city changed seasons around him. Ethan combed through old reports every night, his small office buried under stacks of paper, coffee cups, and photos of missing faces. The Malone case was old, filed under domestic disturbance leading to suspected homicide. A fire had destroyed the family's home on the east side, a fire that was never fully explained. Neighbors had claimed to hear shouting, then silence, then smoke. The report said a woman and child were never found. The husband's body was drunk, violent, long known to police. Ethan read every line until the letters blurred together. He could almost feel the smoke, smell the ash, hear the screams buried under the words. And then, one gray afternoon, the call came. A woman had been found wandering near the outskirts of the city, thin, bruised, exhausted, muttering about losing her little girl in a fire. Ethan's hands went numb. He fumbled for his notepad, voice trembling as he asked, "What's her name?" The voice on the other end hesitated, then said softly, "She told us her name is Claire." He didn't even wait for backup. He drove through the rain, siren silent, his heart pounding harder than the engine beneath him. The shelter sat at the edge of the city, a weathered building with peeling paint and a sign that once read, "Hope House," though the letters were now fading with time. Inside it smelled of old coffee and warm soup. A few volunteers moved quietly, offering blankets and whispered comfort to faces that had forgotten safety. And there, in a small chair near the window, sat Claire Malone. She looked like a shadow. Her hair was matted, tangled with bits of soot. Her skin was pale, marked with bruises and scars that spoke of years unkind. Her eyes were hollow, the kind of hollow that no sleep could fill. When Ethan entered, she didn't look up. Her hands trembled in her lap, fingers twisting the edge of an old coat someone had given her. He approached slowly, like one might approach a wounded bird. He didn't say her name at first. He just knelt and reached into his jacket. Then he pulled out the small photograph, the one he'd found beside Ivy. The moment Claire's eyes landed on it, something inside her broke and came alive all at once. Her breath hitched. Her eyes filled with tears so fast they blurred her vision. Her hand shot forward, clutching the photo with desperate, trembling fingers. She looked at it as if it were a piece of heaven fallen back to earth. Her voice cracked through years of silence. "She's alive," she whispered. Her knees gave out and she sank to the floor, sobbing into her hands. "My baby's alive, my Ivy." Ethan dropped beside her, his throat thick, his own vision blurring. He could barely speak as he nodded. "She's safe now, Claire, I promise you. She's safe." For a long time, neither of them said another word. The sound of rain against the shelter windows filled the space between sobs. A mother who thought she'd lost everything, and a man who refused to let her story end that way. The reunion at the hospital was almost too much to bear. When Claire entered the room, her hands shook so hard she could barely touch the door. She saw Ivy lying there, small and quiet, the oxygen tube gently moving with each breath. She stopped, her lips parted, but no sound came out. Then a single word escaped her, a whisper shaped by pure disbelief, "Ivy." The little girl's eyes opened slowly, confused, drowsy, and then recognition flickered. Her lips trembled and a small broken smile formed. "Mommy." Claire ran forward, falling to her knees beside the bed, gathering her daughter into her arms as if to shield her from the world. They both cried, the kind of cry that releases years of terror in one breath. Ethan stood back, watching, his heart heavy and light at the same time. It was the kind of moment you never forget. The kind of moment that reminds you why you chose to care in a world that often doesn't. And for Ethan Cole, the officer who refused to look away, that day became a quiet miracle. Because sometimes, the fire doesn't take everything. Sometimes it leaves behind just enough embers for love to find its way home. Ivy's eyes widened the moment she saw the woman standing by the door. For a heartbeat, the world forgot how to move. No one spoke. No one dared to breathe. There was only that sacred, fragile silence, the kind that lives between memory and miracle. The room held its breath with them, as if the walls themselves knew something extraordinary was happening. Then, in a voice barely louder than a whisper, Ivy breathed a single word. "Mommy." It wasn't loud, but it was enough to shatter every wall that pain had ever built. Claire's body broke forward before her mind could even catch up. She ran, stumbling the last few steps, and fell to her knees beside the bed, hands trembling as they reached for her daughter's face. When she finally held Ivy, it was like holding air, fragile, precious, and impossibly real. She buried her face in her daughter's hair, sobbing into the scent of hospital soap and hope. Her arms wrapped around Ivy as if to keep her from vanishing again. The little girl clung back, her tiny fingers gripping her mother's shirt with the strength of someone who had found home again. The nurses nearby couldn't hold back tears. One of them quietly covered her mouth, eyes glistening as she turned away. Another pressed a hand over her heart, whispering something only she could hear. A prayer, a thank you, a reminder of love's endurance. And then there was Ethan, standing in the hallway, frozen. His hand found his mouth, and before he knew it, his vision blurred. He turned away quickly, pretending to check his radio, but his shoulders told the truth. Tears spilled silently down his face. Not the kind of tears that come from sadness, but the kind that come when the soul finally exhales after carrying too much for too long. He leaned against the wall, eyes shut, feeling the weight of every story, every loss, every life that ended without this kind of ending. For years, he had seen pain. He had seen cruelty. He had seen how easily the world forgot its gentle side. But this moment, this reunion of mother and child, reminded him why he put on the uniform in the first place. Not for glory, not for orders, but for hope, for the chance to prove that compassion still mattered. Inside the room, Claire was whispering softly to her daughter, tracing circles on her small hand. "I never stopped looking," she said, voice trembling. "I never stopped, baby. I never stopped." Ivy's eyes fluttered open again, and for the first time since she'd been found, a smile appeared. Small, faint, but real. The heart monitor beside them kept its slow rhythm. Beep, 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 steady and alive. Outside, the world carried on. The nurses moved through the hallways. The night shift began. But in that one room, time had stopped. A mother and daughter were rewriting their story. And Ethan, the man who refused to drive away, stood quietly in the doorway, watching the world find its heartbeat again. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to Kind Heart Stories. Let's remind the world that compassion still exists, that sometimes one act of courage, one quiet moment of care, can rewrite an entire life. Before you go, tell us in the comments, what would you have done if you were Officer Ethan? Would you have stopped the car that day? Would you have followed the sound of that faint broken whimper? Because sometimes the smallest decision, the smallest yes, is what keeps the light from going out. That evening, as Ethan finally stepped out of the hospital, the world had changed. The sky burned orange again, just like the night he first found her, only now the color felt softer, more like warmth than fire. The streets glowed with the same golden light that had once illuminated a broken warehouse and a dying child. But tonight, it illuminated something else. Life. From inside the building, he could hear laughter echoing down the hall, the kind of laughter that only comes from healing, from love rediscovered, from a mother and daughter who had found each other again. It drifted through the open window, soft, musical, alive. Ethan stopped. He stood there, letting the sound wash over him, feeling the weight of months, maybe years, won't finally lift from his chest. He smiled through his tears. A quiet, exhausted, genuine smile. And in that moment, he understood something simple and profound. That kindness, real kindness, isn't just about saving lives. It's about reminding people that their lives are still worth saving. That even in the darkest places, among the broken glass and forgotten streets, and compassion still breathes, still fights, still finds a way home. Ethan looked up at the sunset one last time and whispered to the fading sky, "Thank you." Then he walked back to his car, turned the key and drove, not away from the pain, but toward a world that still needed someone willing to stop. Because now he knew, without a single doubt in his heart, that kindness, no matter how small, can bring the dead parts of the world back to life.